and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Steve Knight.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about how accurate is the Reserve Bank's crystal ball. Now, this is a really fascinating one because every 3 months, the Reserve Bank releases what's called the OCR track. So this is their forecast about where they say they're going to take the OCR in the future. And if we look at their most recent one, the OCR, which is their interest rate, is 5.5% right now. They're saying, hey, look, we may even increase it a little bit more. It's going to stay really high right through till 2025, and we're not going to start bringing it down until about mid-2025 onwards. And I was sitting there over the Christmas break thinking, okay, the Reserve Bank puts out this forecast. They've done it every 3 months for the last 7 years. But how often do they stick to it? How often do they do what they said they were going to do?
So do you think maybe there's a little bit of they control the narrative of what they think the rates are going to do, and then they might not need to increase them?
Well, I think that's what some people say, but it's also about the Reserve Bank needing to respond, right? So I could say, oh, look, Andrew, I'm going to do such and such a thing.
This is what you do. You say you're going to do something and then you don't do it.
Well, I might say, oh, house prices are going to go up 5%. But then as you learn more and as you go through life and new data comes out, you start adjusting whatever you do. So I think what probably happens with the Reserve Bank is they put out this forecast and say, this is what we think we're going to do. But then as new data comes out, as new things crop up, they're going to start to change what they actually do. And so I wanted to put some data around this. But Andrew, why do we care whether the OCR predictions out of the Reserve Bank are accurate or not?
So the OCR often affects your shorter term interest rate, so the 6 months, the 1 year, the 2 year, and the floating interest rate. And so because of that, because the fact that most of us fix for probably one of those periods or have our loan on floating, we tend to watch what the OCR is doing, and it's widely publicised. Like, you don't hear about swap rates very often, but you hear about the OCR.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't hear about swap rates very often. So does the Reserve Bank do what they say they're going to do? I've compared 30 of their previous forecasts with what they actually did, and what we find is that initially, the Reserve Bank pretty much sticks to what it's going to do. So 7 months after they've released their forecast, most of the time, or half the time, they are within like 0.15% of what they said they were going to do. But what happens is as time goes on, they start to deviate away. So a year after they release their forecasts, half the time they are 0.8% away from what they said they were going to do or further. By the time we get out to 3 years after their forecast, they're 1.8 percentage points off. Now, Andrew, put that into context for us. What does that actually mean in practice?
So I guess if the Reserve Bank says the OCR is going to be 3% in 6 months' time, you can be pretty certain that it's probably going to be 3% in 6 months' time. But the longer out it is, the more likely that is to not be as accurate.
Yeah, so if the Reserve Bank says, hey, the OCR is going to be 3% in 12 months' time, well, actually, it could be anywhere between 2.2% to 3.8% some of the time. If they say in 3 years' time, the OCR is going to be 3%, well, that's where you can say, well, in 3 years' time, it could be anywhere from 1.2% all the way up to 4.8%. So that forecast that we're looking at, when we look at their forecast 3 years out, it's not going to be 3.5% in December 2026 like their last forecast said. It could be very, very far off that. Now, Andrew, 0.8% difference in a year's time of the OCR, that might not sound like a lot, but it's a big impact on your mortgage.
Yeah, so on a $500,000 mortgage, that 0.8%, equates to $4,000 worth of interest that you may or may not pay if you have that change.
So when we're thinking about the OCR forecasts, that year out, that could have a big difference. So I want to give you some examples about this. Now, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, you can see this on my screen. If you're listening on the podcast, I actually release this data in my weekly One Roof column, so you can also find this on oneroof.co.nz in the news section. So if we go back to, let's call it November 2018, the Reserve Bank released a forecast where they said, you know what, we are going to gradually increase the OCR from 1.75% and we're going to take it up over the next 3 years to about 2.4%. Now, over the next 3 months. They stuck to that, but then they rapidly decreased the OCR right throughout 2019. And it's important to note this was before the COVID pandemic, right? So I'm not using the COVID lockdowns to fudge the numbers here. They said we're going to take the OCR up, and then throughout 2019, they gradually decreased the OCR. I'll give you another example. This time, let's go to 2021, November 2021. Again, well after we had the COVID lockdowns, but still within the pandemic period. They said, we're going to take the OCR up from about 0.5%, and we think it's going to peak at about 2.6% by the time we get to, 2023, 2024. Well, we know what happened. The OCR didn't peak at 2.6%. It's peaked potentially at 5.5%, and they increased the OCR much faster than what they said they were going to do back in 2021 because inflation was going haywire.
And so you might be thinking, well, if the Reserve Bank's going to release a forecast, but they're not going to stick to it, what's the point? And I think the thing to remember is this is what the Reserve Bank is thinking right now. So with today's data, where they're expecting the OCR to go. Now, you do want the Reserve Bank to make adjustments over time because last thing you want to have happen is, all of a sudden the economy's flat, they want to stimulate it, inflation's really down, and then all of a sudden they say, well, no, we can't bring down the OCR because we forecast to keep it up.
Yeah, if you were taking that mindset, they'd only be able to adjust the OCR 3 years in the future. And even if we look at this, back in 2018, they were saying we're going to take the OCR up, and throughout 2021, we're going to increase it to 2.2%. Imagine if they just followed that rather than bringing it down during the COVID lockdowns. We would have seen unemployment skyrocket. We would have seen the economy do a lot worse than it actually did. And although house prices probably wouldn't have gone up quite as much, we would have had to go through a lot of economic pain. So if anybody's watching from the Reserve Bank, and there are 510 people who work there, we're not saying that they're doing something wrong by not following their forecast. But we're just saying if you as a property investor are looking at that forecast thinking, oh, the Reserve Bank, they're going to keep the OCR really high right throughout 2025 because that's what they said they were going to do, actually might not work out that way. And if we overlay that error that they often have, going up to 1.8% wrong after 3 years, we could get a really interesting sense of what may happen in the future. Because at the moment, if we look at the money markets, a lot of people are pricing in and saying, we are going to see the Reserve Bank cut interest rates sooner and faster than what they say they are going to do. And the question that I have is that within the realm of possibility? Could that potentially happen? Well, if we think that over time they get less and less accurate, I would expect that through to mid-2024, we're probably still going to have the OCR really high, right? Because within 6 months of their forecast, they usually stick to it pretty well. So by June this year, probably going to be about 5.5%. But beyond that, we could see some rapid falls. If we think about that average error, by the end of the year, the OCR could be perhaps even 4.8%. It could be 5% or 4.75% if that average error that they've had in the past holds into the future, if that track record holds. Of course, by the same token, the OCR could increase, but given today's current economic environment, it's more likely to come down.
And remember, of course, one of the levers that the Reserve Bank has is the media. So if they put out this kind of tough talk message to everyone, that creates a behavior in people where they're a little bit more nervous about borrowing extra money, about spending extra, and it has the desired effect without even having to increase the OCR.
Yeah, so they might be saying, hey, we're going to be really tough. It's going to be 5.5%. We're going to be really tough right throughout mid-2025. Then maybe we'll give you some relief there. And that might spook us all and say, oh, no, we're not going to borrow any money. We're worried that interest rates are going to stay high. Now, I'm not trying to dismiss that the Reserve Bank could actually follow what they're currently saying. And if we look at their more recent predictions, they've stuck a little bit more closely to the OCR track that they have been releasing. But what I'm trying to do for you guys here is just say when you see a forecast out from the Reserve Bank about what they say they're going to do with the OCR, if you see a house price prediction, it sometimes looks really set in stone because the Reserve Bank says it's going to be 5.5% in 12 months' time. But if you look at what actually happens over time, they get less accurate. The OCR could go up, the OCR could go down. Right now, it is more likely to come down. If their track record holds of how inaccurate they tend to be in following their own forecasts, it is not outside the realm of possibility that we could see the OCR fall potentially with a high 4 in front of it by the end of the year. I'm not telling you that it's definitely going to happen, but it is within the realm of possibility. 50% of the time, they would deviate that far away from their forecasts. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Property Academy podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you're listening to the podcast and want to see these graphs, I've got 2 options for you. Either Google Opus Partners YouTube, it'll be the first thing that comes up. You'll be able to see all the pretty graphs as well as our faces. Or if you just want the graphs, just go to oneroof.co.nz. We've published these in my latest One Roof column. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of your property market. Until next time.